Our guest is Marcia Chatelain, who's Associate Professor of History and African American Studies at Georgetown University. Good evening to you. Also author of Franchise, The Golden Arches in Black America. Thank you very much for being with us, Marcia Chatelain. The situation as you are observing it and watching it unfold, and you as yourself as a person of colour must be feeling it very acutely. How do you feel when you hear what President Trump has to say? I mean, speaking about the people who are protesting as being lowlife and scum.
Well, that rhetoric isn't surprising. This has been the entire mode of his public presentation since he emerged as a developer and a business person. It's alarming because he is president of the United States. And so his racism now is not only fueled by his own financial empire, but also can draw upon the resources of the military as well as the entire United States government. So it makes me more fearful, although not surprised, that this person has the capacity to do more harm than he has in the past.
What do you make of the fact some police officers almost seem like they're being from the kind of conciliation division of public service, actually trying to start a dialogue with the protesters? Do you take heart when you see that?
I don't, because the police have had a long history of co-opting the rhetoric of protest in order to try to connect with community, but their behavior and their structure doesn't change. If the police are really serious about changing what they are confronting right now, then they will actively call for their own defunding and dismantling. And we have decades of history of these types of uprisings across the 20th and now in the 21st century. And these signs of momentary solidarity never inspire a change in behavior, because the same police officers who are willing to kneel with protesters are the same ones who will follow orders and throw tear gas into crowds.
Is a solution perhaps more recruitment of people who aren't white?
No, this tactic has been tried from the 1960s and the 1970s. And while some officers of color may act with some levels of moderation, as long as policing is predicated on the capacity to be violent with people and then ask questions later, changing the racial demographics of the police does not bring justice. What does bring justice is giving people the resources and tools within their own communities to provide for their needs and to protect each other.
If Donald Trump is one day out of the White House, do you feel any optimism that things will change?
I'm cautiously optimistic that there can be changes made, but I think we've seen increasingly that the presidency matters for setting a tone, but the real power resides with people who have their needs and resources met, who have decent housing, education for their children and for themselves, food and healthcare. That's how you ensure domestic tranquility. The president is only as powerful as his capacity or her capacity to actually care for people. And we've seen just an incredible failure in this presidency and throughout the history of the United States.
What you're calling for then is basically a wholesale change in US society.
Absolutely, because we've seen this kind of unrest on presidents who've considered themselves progressives or moderates, liberals, as well as conservatives. The issue isn't who is at the top, it's the structure that that person governs over. And we see that this has failed. And now this is a moment of reckoning for the entire world. And for those of us in the US, we have the imagination, we have the spirit, we have the heart to actually make a change. And we see that every day on the streets. The question is, do we really want to see a transformation of power?
Marcia, we have a situation going on here in France right now, an ongoing, I hesitate to call it a riot, but it was a peaceful demonstration that disintegrated into scenes of violence. Let's put it that way. 19,000 people had gathered to call for justice for a black Frenchman who died in police custody 4 years ago. And his sister is drawing parallels between what happened to George Floyd just 8 days ago. The internet, do you think this is playing a role in pushing towards trying to get some kind of resolution, or is it making things worse?
Well, I think that any communication channel has the capacity to bring people together in solidarity. It's amazing to see the kind of global community that has emerged as a result of people suffering from police violence. These communication channels also can spread disinformation. And so we balance the good and the bad with it, but we know that at the end of the day, regardless of whether we have an internet or not, we have people who are strong in their character and their resolve to make a difference. And that is the most important thing. And I think that the US and France are in a parallel process in which people are contending with the legacy of capitalism as well as colonialism in the everyday struggles of people.
Fascinating observations there, Marcia Chatelain. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Just to repeat and remind people, Marcia Chatelain, Associate Professor of History and African American Studies at Georgetown University and author of the book, and I think we can show that book again, Franchise, The Golden Arches in Black America. Marcia Chatelain, thank you very much for your analysis.